What if I told you that a single rule could change Ferrari's fate in 2025? What would happen if the team that is lagging in the championship could be reborn thanks to a regulatory decision? Stay, because what I'm going to tell you is the turning point that nobody expected. Internally, tensions soon emerge. The Leclerc-Hamilton duo, although respectful in the public, began to show differences in style and focus. Hamilton, accustomed to a Mercedes environment with ultra-financed development processes and solid communication structures, found in Ferrari an organization still prone to improvisation. His adaptation process was slower than expected, and his statements after each race became more prudent, more tactical. Leclerc, on the other hand, was still fast on a return, but unable to hold a race rhythm in long batches. By the time they arrived in Shanghai, the narrative was already installed. Ferrari was disappointing. The most worrying thing was that it was not a single problematic area. The performance deficit covered aerodynamics, tire management, and boxes efficiency. Unlike previous years where a specific weak point could be pointed out, this time the problem was structural. Fred Vasseur, head of the team, began to be questioned for his development strategy and his insistence on a gradual evolution model that was clearly not giving immediate results. Faced with this, McLaren and Mercedes, with more aggressive philosophies and updates, began to take advantage. And just in this scenario of generalized crisis, an external, unexpected decision appears, which could alter the entire board. The new technical directive of the FIA on the flexible ailerons. The introduction of the technical directive TD018 by the FIA represents one of the most significant regulatory turns so far in the 2025 season. To understand its impact, you must first go back to the technical and political context that precedes it. During the last 2 years, aerodynamic evolution in Formula One has revolved around a diffuse border, the structural flexibility allowed in the ailerons. While the regulations stipulate static evidence to limit how much these pieces can be deformed under load, the most ingenious teams have explored ways to maximize dynamic flexion without technically violating regulations. This legal margin was exploited with mastery by teams such as McLaren and Mercedes. Both developed front spoilers with specific sections that, under air pressure at high speeds, were deformed in a controlled way. This allowed to reduce aerodynamic resistance in lines gaining tip speed, and then recover aerodynamic load in braking or curves, all without active pilot intervention. The phenomenon, known in engineering as aeroelasticity, became a fundamental differential advantage. And although the systems were technically legal under the static tests imposed by the FIA, its track operation began to raise suspicions. The drop that filled the glass was the Azerbaijan 2024 GP, where high-speed cameras captured abnormal movements on the McLaren rear spoiler. What was seen was a kind of permanent mini DRS, a wing that, without mechanical intervention, opened in lines, reducing resistance as if it were a mobile piece. Red Bull and Ferrari, two of the teams that had not followed this development path, began to press hard. They argued that the aerodynamic advantage obtained was against the spirit of the regulations and unbalanced the competition. The FIA, which had maintained a conservative position since 2022 by avoiding modifying ailer tests, was forced to act. He did it cautiously. First, they implemented cameras and deformation sensors in cars during the second half of 2024 to collect data. It was a silent but key movement. What they found confirmed their suspicions. Some teams were using highly sophisticated solutions to exploit the gray areas of the regulation. Thus was born the TD018, a directive that does not modify the technical regulations per se, but that redefines the tolerance limits in the spoiler flexibility tests. Specifically, it reduces the allowed flexion on the 15 mm to 10 mm front wing under specific loads. Although 5 mm may seem insignificant, at the aerodynamic level they imply a deep redesign of the frontal concept of the affected cars. Loads generated in high speed will be less cushioned, reducing the drag reduction effect and penalizing the equipment that had optimized this area. The FIA chose the GP of Spain 2025 as implementation, non-random decision. It is a medium-high load track with long curves where the front wing plays a critical role. A perfect proof field to evaluate the real effects of the regulations. But the FIA decision was not immediate or unanimous. Inside the organization there were intense debates. Some managers feared that introducing changes in the middle of the season would generate technical chaos and harm the narrative of the championship. However, the argument of competitive equity prevailed. The FIA justified the measure as a necessary correction to ensure that the equipment competes under a common ethical framework, beyond legal gaps. Technical transparency over normative stability was prioritized. In addition, a technical notice phase was introduced that allowed the equipment to adjust their developments for several weeks before the entry into force of the TD018. This measure sought to mitigate the economic and operational impact of having to redesign components from one day to another. The potential impact of this directive is huge. Not only does the track performance directly affect, but also the way in which teams must address their aerodynamic development programs for the rest of the year. Those who built their performance on a controlled flexibility basis, such as McLaren and Mercedes, now face a dilemma. Modify their concepts and lose efficacy or risk technical sanctions if their solutions do not exceed new tests. In this scenario, Ferrari, which never aggressively adopted flexible ailerons, could be unexpectedly benefited. For Ferrari, the introduction of the technical directive TD018 is not just one more regulation. It is a possible salvation table in the middle of a sea of uncertainty. Unlike McLaren and Mercedes, who built a significant part of their competitive advantage over highly flexible ailer solutions, Ferrari followed a more conservative philosophy. Its SF25 was designed with a clear priority: predictability and structural stability, particularly on the front axle. This decision, which at the time seemed to limit the performance ceiling of the car, is now transformed into an unexpected strategic advantage. Having not exploited the maximum allowed flexion in the ailerons prior to the TD018, Ferrari does not have to completely redesign a critical section of the car. The key is in the management of aerodynamic loads and how this new regulation impacts the general balance of the car. Flexible front spoils allow equipment to reduce load, gaining tip speed and recover aerodynamic support in curves by scheduled wing deformation. It is an equilibrium game that depends on extremely precise engineering. McLaren and Mercedes adjusted much of the car around these dynamic behaviors. Eliminating that flexion or reducing it drastically implies that its aerodynamic balance will be altered, affecting not only curves load, but also energy efficiency, tire management, and the junction of the car under braking. For these teams, it will be like having to rallier the car from scratch. Ferrari, on the other hand, can take the opportunity to stabilize your performance. While the SF25 does not have a dominant rhythm, its behavior is more linear. In a scenario where direct rivals must adjust motor maps, suspensions, and set up philosophy in a matter of weeks, the simple fact of maintaining stability represents an advantage. This takes on special value in a calendar such as modern F1, where there are consecutive races, little time for testing, and an increasingly compressed logistics. Adapting faster is not only a technical issue, it is a matter of competitive survival. In addition, this regulation arrives at a time when Ferrari has begun to implement an update package focused precisely on the front axle. Sources close to the team indicate that it is a moderate redesign of the flow channels to the end plates, accompanied by adjustments in the geometry of the front suspension to improve the behavior in average curves. Under normal conditions, these improvements would have had a limited impact. But under the new directive, they could represent a giant step in front of the teams that must now redraw their technical roadmap. Fred Vasseur and his team have declared that they see this situation as a window of opportunity, a space to shorten distances when it seemed that everything was lost. The psychological aspect cannot be underestimated either. The pilots, particularly Hamilton, have shown clear signs of frustration in the first careers, but also a willingness to adjust their style and contribute to development. If the regulations balance the playing field, Hamilton may compete from U to U with McLaren and Red Bull without depending exclusively on aerodynamic improvements. For its part, Leclerc, that has suffered due to the lack of stability in long batches, could find in this new panorama a more predictable base that allows it to exploit its natural speed without over-exegating the car. The TD018 directive is not a guarantee of success for Ferrari, but a redistribution of technical power on the grille. It represents an adjustment of regulatory accounts that gives the teams less favored by flexion engineering a new chance to fight. In a season where the differences between the pointer cars are on the margins, a structural change in how the aerodynamic flow at high speed behaves can mean the difference between a mediocre classification and a pole position, between a fourth place and a podium. Ferrari has no more margin for errors. But for the first time in months, it has something that its rivals does not: a stability that, in this new context, can be transformed into an advantage. What happens in the 2025 Grand Prix will be much more than a simple career. It will mark a before and after in the season. The implementation of the TD018 technical directive is not a marginal correction or a symbolic decision. It is, in essence, a partial restart of the technical balance between the leading teams. In an era of Formula One where margins are microscopic and any detail can mean a tenth of second vital, A modification in aerodynamic foundations has the potential to redistribute hierarchies drastically. And in the midst of that regulatory storm, Ferrari has found a flotation line that had not been planned, but could now be decisive. It is not just about benefiting because others lose. It is about capitalizing an opportunity that requires preparation, strategic vision, and adaptation speed. Ferrari has a moment that could transform an erratic season into a story of redemption. But it also carries risks. If the Italian team fails to translate this theoretical technical advantage in concrete results, the narrative of resurgence under regulations will fade as fast as it appeared. The paddock is relentless, and the rivals will find ways to recover performance. McLAREN, for example, has demonstrated on multiple occasions its ability to react with aggressiveness and efficacy to unexpected changes. Mercedes, meanwhile, remains a technical giant who should never underestimate himself. Even Red Bull, with all its internal challenges, has the resources and knowledge to redirect its approach when the regulation demands it. The key to Ferrari will not only technique, but also emotional and organizational. These types of changes can generate a wave of optimism that drives the team towards better decision-making, internal cohesion, and renewed trust in the pilots. But that same environment can become unbearable pressure if immediate results are not obtained. The challenge then is double. Take advantage of the technical hole generated by the new regulations and turn it into real sports impulse, without falling into premature euphoria or anxiety errors. The Spanish GP will be the definitive testing field. Not only for the front wing of the SF25, but for Ferrari's ability as an elite structure. We will see if this team is able to execute a comprehensive strategy that not only takes advantage of the moment, but transforms it into a solid and sustained reconstruction of its candidacy for the championship. Because the modern Formula One does not reward those who expect the rules to favor them. Reward those who know how to read the moment, adapt first, and run better than anyone. And this is where I want to leave you with a question. Do you think that Ferrari is really in a position to take advantage of this directive, or are we facing a temporary illusion that only make up a deeper structural problem? Can a change of 5 millimeters become the beginning of a change of era for the Scuderia?